Hi everyone! I went to the library and looked for books to share with you. And I picked this one because it's a really good story that teaches us about friendship and not giving up hope. Think for a minute. Have you ever felt like you wanted to fit in? Have you ever felt like you wanted to belong to something like a club or a sports team? And if those things didn't happen right away, did you ever feel like you wanted to give up? When we read this story, it will help you see how a teddy bear feels like he does not belong, but never loses hope to find what he always wanted, friendship. I also chose today's story for you because the author does such a great job. When authors write stories, they have to decide on characters, the people or animals in the story, so the little teddy bear and the girl, a setting, the place and time where the story happens, and events, what is actually going to happen. I bet they plan out their story before they start to write. Maybe they use something like this, a story map. Now that we have taken a look at the story map, let's dive into our story and see if we can fill out the setting, the characters, the events, and the ending. Corduroy by Don Freeman. Corduroy is a bear who once lived in the toy department of a big store. Day after day, he waited with all the other animals and dolls for somebody to come along and take him home. The store was always filled with shoppers buying all sorts of things, but no one ever seemed to want a small bear in green overalls. Then one morning, a little girl stopped and looked straight into Corduroy's bright eyes. "Oh, Mommy," she said, "look, there's the very bear I've always wanted." "Not today, dear," her mother sighed. "I've spent too much already. Besides, he doesn't look new. He's lost the button to one of his shoulder straps." Let's stop here for a minute. I think that the author has just described a key event. What important thing just happened in our story? And how do you know from the words and pictures? Corduroy watched them sadly as they walked away. "I didn't know I'd lost a button," he said to himself. "Tonight I'll go and see if I can find it." Let's stop a minute. I think the author has given us clues about characters. What information do we have in the words and pictures that tell us about the traits and personalities of the characters in our story? So what can you tell me, based on the pictures you see and the words that you've heard, about Corduroy and the little girl? Late that evening, when all the shoppers had gone and the doors were shut and locked, Corduroy climbed carefully down from his shelf and began searching everywhere on the floor for his lost button. Suddenly, he felt the floor moving under him. Quite by accident, he had stepped onto an escalator, and up he went. Could this be a mountain, he wondered? I think I've always wanted to climb a mountain. He stepped off the escalator as it reached the next floor, and there, before his eyes, was the most amazing sight. Tables, chairs, lamps, and sofas, and rows of beds. "This must be a palace," Corduroy gasped. "I guess I've always wanted to live in a palace." Let's stop again. I think the author has given us clues about the setting. What information do we have in the words and in the pictures that can tell us where our story takes place? He wandered around admiring the furniture. "This must be a bed," he said. "I've always wanted to sleep in a bed." And he crawled up onto a large, thick mattress. All at once, he saw something small and round. "Why, here's my button," he cried, and he tried to pick it up. But like all the other buttons on the mattress, it was tied down tight. He yanked and pulled with both paws until pop! Off came the button, and off the mattress Corduroy toppled. Bang! Into the tall floor lamp. Over it fell with a crash. Corduroy didn't know it, but there was someone else awake in the store. The night watchman was going his rounds on the floor above when he heard the crash and came dashing down the escalator. "Now who in the world did that?" he exclaimed. Somebody must be hiding around here. He flashed his light under and over the sofas and beds until he came to the biggest bed of all, and there he saw 2 fuzzy brown ears sticking up from under the covers. "Hello," he said. "How did you get upstairs?" The watchman tucked Corduroy under his arm and carried him down the escalator and set him on the shelf in the toy department with the other animals and dolls. Let's stop here for a minute. I think the author has just described another key event. What important thing has just happened, and how do you know from the words and pictures that you see and hear in our story? Corduroy was just waking up when the first customers came into the store in the morning, and there, looking at him with a wide, warm smile, was the same little girl he'd seen the day before. "I'm Lisa," she said, "and you're going to be my very own bear. Last night I counted what I saved in my piggy bank, and my mother said I could bring you home." "Shall I put him in a box for you?" the saleslady said. "Oh, no, thank you," Lisa answered, and she carried Corduroy home in her arms. She ran all the way up 4 flights of stairs into her family's apartment and straight to her own room. So let's stop again. I think the author has just described another key event. What important thing just happened in our story? How do you know from the words and the pictures that you see? Corduroy blinked. There was a chair and a chest of drawers, and alongside a girl-sized bed stood a little bed, just the right size for him. The room was small, nothing like that enormous palace in the department store. "This must be home," he said. "I know I've always wanted a home." Lisa sat down with Corduroy on her lap and began to sew a button on his overalls. "I like you the way you are," she said, "but you'll be more comfortable with your shoulder strap fastened." "You must be a friend," said Corduroy. "I've always wanted a friend." "Me too," said Lisa, and gave him a big hug. And that is the end of our story. So let's talk about the ending. What happened? Why do you think the author planned it to end that way? There were some great words in our story. Let's talk about 2 of them. The first one is admiring. What word? Admiring. To admire means to look at something with great approval. In the story, the author used admiring to describe the way Corduroy looked at all of the furniture in the department store. You could also use admiring to say, "When I went to the beach, I was admiring the pretty sunset." You could use that word too. You could say, "I was admiring my food as my mom put the plate in front of me." Great! To admire means to look at something with great approval. What word are we working on? Admiring. The next word that we're going to be looking at is enormous. What word? Enormous. Enormous describes something that is very big. In our story, the author used enormous to describe how Corduroy thought the furniture at the department store was enormous compared to the furniture in the girls' room. You could also use enormous to say, "When I went to the city, I saw some enormous buildings," or "The plane we took for our trip was enormous." You could use that word too. You could say, "The elephant was enormous standing next to the bird." Great! Enormous describes something that is very big. What word are we working on? Enormous. Thank you for reading with me today. I hope you enjoyed this story. We learned a couple of new words, admiring and enormous. And we read a great story called Corduroy and learned about friendship and never giving up hope. Why do you think the author chose this title? Great! Thank you again for working with me today.